And other than Arbitrum, there may be a fifth chain to join our four other chains. One that you're very excited about, one I've been hearing a lot about for several months now, which is Berachain. Berachain I've looked into a bit. It's a Cosmos. How I'm familiar with it, it's a Cosmos chain that uses proof of liquidity. It's really based off of synthetic assets and or synthetic assets or wrapped assets. You can go into it. Can you explain like what makes Berachain unique and novel, and like why are you bullish on Berachain?
Yeah, for sure. So, what it is like with proof of liquidity, like you, there will be different assets you can stake into consensus vaults, such as ETH, Bitcoin, Bera, stable coins, etc. When you stake those assets into the consensus vaults, you get like a liquid a version of it that you can swap into other consensus assets. You can use as collateral to borrow against and do a bunch of other things on the chain. And then what happens when you deposit those assets into the consensus vaults? They're paired with Honey, the chain's native stablecoin, and so your stakers are contributing to the security of the chain, the liquidity of the chain, and like they're free to kind of do all of their different DeFi things on the native L1. And then like as an L1, they've also integrated Croc Swap, and they'll have like an L1
Ooh.
native DEX. And then they will also have a perpetuals exchange. And what they do when they pair your staked asset. So if I deposit ETH and in return I get some share of Bera emissions based on my staked ETH. And then if I wanted to take that, unstake that Bera, I can get the same amount of ETH back. And given they have the perpetuals exchange and the native DEX built into the L1 mechanism, they hedge like all of, or they are so they allegedly hedge all of the IL with perpetuals positions, and then all of the fees that are accumulated like from the various like products on the L1 itself, all are returned to Bera stakers. And then there's like a third token in the ecosystem called BGT, which is like kind of like I don't know if you're familiar with like Platypus on Avalanche or Hummus on Metis, but it's like it accumulates over time. It's like non-transferable, non-saleable. So their governance token just accumulates over time. And if you unstake, you lose that. But like your share of BGT will dictate your share of the Honey emissions, which are stable coin emissions. So they're building, like, long story short is like they're building a chain where they should develop super deep liquidity, because like you like when you stake, you can do anything with staked assets that you could do otherwise. Plus they have like this native DeFi infrastructure built into the L1
Mm-hmm.
that will accumulate fees for the chain and for stakers. So I think it's like a totally new primitive, and like as new projects that launch on Bera, you can tap into that chain's liquidity. Pair with that liquidity, you can become a consensus asset. And like, so if you think about the opportunities when you have super deep liquidity like that, they're kind of like endless. And like you can think about like the flywheel that kicks off if like you have different consensus gauges, and like hidden hand is coming to the chain, and like you want to like bribe people to be like a consensus asset on the chain. And like I think what you've also seen, aside from like the mechanics on the chain, I guess, is they started with NFTs. They created a great ecosystem. There's been like a ton of hype. There's like 50,000 people or something in the Discord already.
Lots of
The
hype.
chain won't be live for like, I don't know, until early 23. And you know, I can probably think of like 30 plus projects I know of that are already building there. Like you have a ton of stuff. Like most of the time you go to a new L1, there's not much to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like with this, it's like, you have all of this native DeFi infrastructure built into the chain that'll print real yield and like actual fees. And then the other thing that's kind of interesting is they're in like Synapse is going to be their canonical bridge. And if you think about SynChain, and if SynChain becomes larger, Berachain will kind of be like a new liquidity primitive almost, right? Because like if you have that super deep liquidity, if for any cross chain swaps that end up happening, Berachain would be like the liquidity layer to get the deepest liquidity, lowest slippage on large trades because you have all of that liquidity backing the security of your chain.
So, wow, that's impressive. I was gonna ask, like, when people stake their ETH for, is it they stake it for consensus or do they stake it for Bera or like what'd you say before?
Yeah, so like, so they bear. I think the inflation is like 10% a year. You stake your ETH, you get
Is
that
it
inflation in
is it
Bera
native
token.
ETH? Like, where do they stake it?
I think it'll be wrapped ETH.
It would be wrapped ETH. Okay.
Yeah,
And so like you would have to bridge your ETH, or no, you would
via
have to, yeah,
Synapse.
yeah, via
Yeah.
Synapse. Okay.
So
Got
I
it.
think
Got
they're
it.
going to have a mix of like L1 tokens. Bera is obviously an asset that you can stake, and then
Yeah.
stable coins in their own honey, which is their stable coin. So you stake that. You then once it's staked, like say you're like long ETH, then you decide like you think there's going to be a sell off. You want to be swapping to stables. You don't need to unstake your ETH. Like you can swap that
Swap into
staked ETH into
honey.
swapped USDC or swap or into staked USDC or staked honey and like swap into stables while that remains staked. Or you can use that staked ETH as collateral to borrow against or in a purpose exchange while they hedge kind of that exposure and like they can build like they're leveraging like honey's going to be over collateralized but they're leveraging like the same AMO mechanism that Frax has in terms of like honey and like building that into the native L1 in terms of like minting or burning honey into like these various pairs plus hedging that exposure and like I think that's why they built on Cosmos is it just gave them a lot more like functionality around the mechanics they could build into the native L1 that you couldn't just do on Solidity. So I think that like I mean, it's a no question a tall feat, but if they're able to like figure this out and make it work, I think it's like a whole new like I said primitive for DeFi to be honest.
Oh, got it.
That's
And
fascinating.
D24, let me make sure that I get it, and also for the benefit of the listener at home here, let's walk me through the user journey of. I'm gonna walk you through it and hear if I'm correct. I have
Sure.
ETH on ETH main chain. I bridge over via Synapse. Then once I'm on Berachain, I have to stake that ETH, and I would have a liquid staking, in return, where it's called Bera ETH, for the example's sake. And then this Bera ETH, I can do whatever it is that I want to do on chain, whether it be collateralizing it and borrowing some honey, or I can collateralize it in their perp exchange and trades on the perps. But I would have this Bera ETH, and I can take this Bera ETH to. Can I also then stake that Bera ETH to earn Bera tokens, which is the native token of the chain?
Yeah, so just to like clarify, you stake your ETH, you get your I believe you get your Bear ETH. I don't know exactly if you get a liquid version or how it works, but I don't think you can use it for anything on the chain. But
Oh,
since they have like an L1 native DEX, L1 native perps platform, like there are, and I could be wrong about this. Like this is my understanding of it. Like you can use it for like those applications that are built into the native L1, I don't think you can go and do any like if you want to swap it, you can only swap it for other consensus vault assets and you don't have to stake that ETH for what it's worth, right? Like you can bring ETH onto the chain and do whatever you want with that ETH, but
okay.
if you wanted to stake it for consensus for emissions, that's kind of like what you're able to do and when you stake it, you get Bera emissions effectively. And then if you stake that Bera, you get Bera emissions plus you get a share of the fees of the native like DeFi stuff that is built into the L1 in terms of a stable coin.
Understand. And how does honey play into the effect?
So all of the fees of like the on CrocSwap on the Perps platform, that those are all printed in Honey. Plus, when you stake your, if you want to stake your ETH into the consensus vaults, what that ETH is paired with Honey in their native DEX. So all of these consensus assets will be paired against Honey, and that exposure, that IL exposure is then hedged out via their perp, and all of this stuff that happens in their native DEX and perps product, all prints fees in Honey for Bera stakers.
This is one
Got
hell
it.
of a flywheel.
Yeah, where does the original honey come from? Like, is it minted
It's
somewhere?
over
'Cause
collateralized, right? It's over
Yeah,
collateralized.
it's an over collateralized CDP. And then for the honey that they pair with these staked assets, they use an AMO mechanism.
got it. Okay, so I can technically bridge ETH over, don't deal with the staking of the Bera ETH, and I can collateralize my ETH and then mint honey with that. And then I can obviously take the honey and play with the protocol as I
Do
need,
you
like
earn
any
fees
CDP.
if you mint the honey because you're like blocking your ETH, or no?
Yeah, so you can. I think if you were to mint honey, you would stake it first because you'd stake it and then you would mint the honey against that, and then for any Bera missions you earn, you have to stake the Bera to earn the fees of the protocol, and then like the longer that you're staked
The
for your
more
Bera, the
ETH you
more
take,
that you
yeah.
stake, you get a larger share of that honey. And this isn't confirmed, but my guess is that like the Bera NFT holders are going to get some share of that BGT. BGT is the token that you get from staking the Bera, which indicates how much of the honey that you receive from the fees that are printed on the chain.
Got it.
Does
Okay.
that make sense? I know it's like there's like it's like pretty novel, but I think it's like I don't know. I think it's very interesting if they can figure this out. And
Yeah.
like the team, they seem like very smart dudes that have worked on this a while.
Yeah.
So
No,
we'll see.
I follow it. It'll just take some time to marinate and
Yeah.
digest because I've heard different explanations of Bera in the past. I've read a few threads,
Yeah.
but since it's like so novel, it takes some time to understand and digest.
It's
100%. Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
clicking for me after hearing it the second time. So I'm pretty sure by the 69th time I'll totally get it.
Yeah.
And but I want to ask you for D24. So how do we play this then? Like you said, the chain is not going to come out until 2023. So what do?
What do?
Yeah, I mean, I aped like some of the cheaper NFTs to be honest. I believe that they will have utility around them, but that's not financial advice. I have no idea. um, and then it's like what I've been doing is just watching for projects building on Bera. There will also, I believe, be an incentivized testnet.
Mm.
So like I think that they'll talk about that in the Discord, and like I'm not sure how you get invited to that. And like I think the way that I heard it described was since there's a lot more to do on Bera than your typical L1, they want to give people time with the test net to do all these different things, and then I believe that'll be incentivized. So I would say like follow, watch them, figure that out, and then kind of track like projects that are building there. Because I think it'll be I think that once they launch, hopefully like it times well with like RB season, then they launch, I could see like, a lot of liquidity migrating over there. Because if you think about like just the base layer L1 mechanism, like what you can build on top of that, like there's probably some pretty interesting sort of vaults and stuff you can build utilizing that.
Yeah, like especially like projects building on there. CrocSwap's really impressive, honestly. Like I've been hearing about them for over a year now, and it's cool to hear that they're building on Berachain.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
And then
Man.
the second thing I was gonna say is, since it's a Cosmos SDK, and since it's mainly revolves around like this order book, exchange, perps, the first thing I think of is DYDX. I think of both like Bera and DYDX kind of. I guess since they're both their own chains, like competing in a sense. I want, and also just seeing like the success of DYDX over the past few years. If you like use them as a model for Berachain, if Berachain has this novel liquidity accumulation mechanism, I think if all goes well, and it's quite bullish for Bera.
Yeah, for sure. And like the other thing is like they're totally EVM compatible too. So you can just port an Ethereum application built on Solidity onto Bera too. But yeah, I mean, you're seeing a lot of interesting stuff on Cosmos. To be honest, it's like an ecosystem I haven't paid much attention to. But I feel like you're seeing a lot of building there. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see it play out. And the whole cross-chain MEV thing I mentioned, like I've heard like the Flashbots guys talk about like being pretty like thinking about cross-chain MEV with Ethereum and like seeing what's going on in Cosmos and like kind of using that is something that they're looking at. I think there's like a lot happening there that it's probably worth paying attention to.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to, like the attraction of building your own chain and owning your own land is just so great that you're just going to naturally have a lot of people go and build on Cosmos. It's just a matter of, can those app chains get, enough traction and enough users and be sustainable. And it seems like Berachain's doing a good job, and a phenomenal job of building community, especially before their launch, and attracting quality projects. And I think that's one commonality that you see between Arbitrum and Bera is they don't necessarily have incentives stated yet, but it still attracts high quality builders, which says a lot, especially in this, especially in this era and previous eras where it's just like incentives, and like those incentives are so short-term thinking, and then they run out, and then people are like, "What do?" and they move on to the next thing.
Yeah, 100%, man. I couldn't agree more. I think you'll see like a lot more of that, and I think it's going to be hard for chains that don't focus on building that community first to thrive. And like I also would just say too, like I want to like there's a lot to be said to like building also just on ETH and maintaining the security of Ethereum. Like I think there will
Yeah,
be some successful app chains for sure, but I don't think it like makes sense for everybody by any means.
I agree. It's not as simple as black and white.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think that what the way I heard the Bear team describe it is what they were trying to build into the L1 like logic and mechanics like was more doable on like Tendermint than Solidity, like building like the AMO functionality like into the base layer. Like I don't know that was possible on Solidity, but and again, so like makes sense, but I don't know that it makes sense for everyone. But some of these bigger protocols, like I could see it working for.